Hello, my name is Matt Shar, and today I am going to share a few passages of Scripture in which Jesus is reported to have performed miracles in the presence of large crowds in named locations. Then I will explain how these reports being present in the Gospels should give us great confidence in the truth of the Christian faith. First, we need to cover a little background information on the Gospel authors. I find it helpful to utilize scholars who are opposed to the Christian faith because then no one can accuse us of using sources that are biased in our favor. This excerpt is from Dr. Richard Carrier, a historian out of Columbia University. He is an outspoken atheist and anti-Christian apologist.
Actually, the Greek of all the Gospels, even Mark, who's writing in a low dialect, very similar to the way Mark Twain did, all the Gospels are written in such an expert Greek. There is no way the people who wrote it were not highly educated in Greek schools, which is very peculiar because Greek schools have a particular cultural package that is very distinct from Jewish schools. So the authors of the Gospels are already, they're not Judeans, they're actually diaspora Jews who have been assimilated into Greek and Hellenistic culture and are highly educated. That means they're members of the elite, probably. They might be low-level members of the elite, but these are people who have money or families with money and have been trained up to do this in the elegant Eleusinian style. So they're actually taking stories from the Septuagint, the Greek version of the Old Testament, stories about Moses and Elijah, and they're updating it, they're borrowing phrases, they're doing that complex chiasmic structure, that ring structure I pointed out to you. They're doing all of this immensely complicated, highly advanced literary material and writing. Only upper level scholars could actually do that. So these are not fishermen writing the Gospels. These are not lowbrow people. These are people who have been highly trained in it, and not only highly trained, but we know the actual standard textbooks that they would have been reading and taught in schools and how they were taught to compose, which is exactly how the Gospels are often composed. But they would have actually read a lot of these historians because that was part of the cultural package of what you studied when you learned Greek to that level. So they are fully aware of how history actually looks, and we can be certain of that based on the quality of their own compositions.
As Dr. Carrier indicated, the Gospel authors were top-tier scholars who were expertly trained in the best schools and belonged to the social elite. The Apostle Paul was also a brilliant scholar who was born into the upper echelon of society. The common misconception about the first Christians being comprised solely of the illiterate masses who had nothing to live for and who were desperate for a social community is simply false. The first Christians came from all walks of life, levels of education, and racial backgrounds. Many of the first converts had a lot to lose, and there are a myriad of reasons why the only reasonable explanation for them accepting Christianity is that they believed it to be true. It is important to keep in mind that most of what we believe about ancient history has been handed down to us by people with advanced training in literary composition and history, who investigated reports of a series of events, then composed a historical narrative of what took place. This is exactly what the Gospels are: historical narratives of the life, ministry, death, and resurrection of Jesus composed by top-level scholars who either were eyewitnesses themselves or had the ability to interview the eyewitnesses. It is also important to recognize that the belief that Jesus performed countless miracles and rose from the dead was not a consequence of the Gospels being composed and circulated. The truth is that the Gospels were composed as a consequence of the widespread belief in these things being true of Jesus, which began during his time on earth. Then the Gospels were initially circulated among those who actually witnessed Jesus' ministry and approved by them as an authentic record of what he said and did. In order to gain a sense of the enormous number of miracles Jesus was reported to have performed, and witnesses there were believed to have been, we will follow along his ministry chronologically. In the first passage, Matthew describes Jesus' activities during the first phase of his Galilean ministry.
And he went throughout all Galilee, teaching in their synagogues, and proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom, and healing every disease and every affliction among the people. So his fame spread throughout all Syria, and they brought him all the sick, those afflicted with various diseases and pains, those oppressed by demons, those having seizures and paralytics, and he healed them. And great crowds followed him from Galilee and the Decapolis, and from Jerusalem and Judea, and from beyond the Jordan.
Notice that it says he was going throughout all of Galilee, healing every disease and every affliction. Then people in Syria heard of it, and brought him all of their sick, and he healed them all as well. It is important to keep in mind that Jesus is not only healing people who have vague symptoms that could not be verified by an outside observer. He is said to have healed anyone and everyone suffering from any illness, including those who were paralyzed for one reason or another. These are not brief episodes of relief from a nagging ailment in the height of an emotional prayer meeting, which return as soon as the moment passes. These are instantaneous, complete, and permanent healings from crippling diseases, injuries, or congenital deformities. According to Josephus, there were about 3 million people living throughout the region of Galilee in about 204 cities and villages at this time. Jesus, having been reported to have healed every disease and every affliction, would require him to have healed an absolutely enormous number of people in the presence of an even larger number of witnesses.
Jesus is reported to have performed countless healings throughout the area circled in green, and great crowds of witnesses came from each of the areas circled in blue.
In the next passage, Jesus heals Peter's mother-in-law at Peter's house in Capernaum. Then it goes on to say the following.
That evening at sundown, they brought to him all who were sick or oppressed by demons, and the whole city was gathered together at the door, and he healed many who were sick with various diseases, and cast out many demons.
In Matthew's account, he clarifies that Jesus healed all who were sick in Capernaum. The population of Capernaum in the first century was about 1,500 people, so there were likely hundreds of healings in the presence of a large body of witnesses. Later on, Jesus has an encounter with a leper from the area of Galilee. When Jesus healed him, the leper is reported to have gone around telling everyone about it, to the extent that people came from all over Israel and the surrounding region seeking to be healed. Jesus then traveled south towards Judea and enters a town called Nain.
Soon afterward he went to a town called Nain, and his disciples and a great crowd went with him. As he drew near to the gate of the town, behold, a man who had died was being carried out, the only son of his mother, and she was a widow. And a considerable crowd from the town was with her. And he said, Young man, I say to you, arise. And the dead man sat up and began to speak. And Jesus gave him to his mother. Fear seized them all, and they glorified God, saying, A great prophet has arisen among us, and God has visited his people. And this report about him spread through the whole of Judea and all the surrounding country.
Not only was there a huge crowd who witnessed Jesus raise this person from the dead, but the report was said to have spread throughout all of Judea and the surrounding countryside.
Jesus performed this miracle in the area marked by the red arrow. Then report of the miracle was said to have spread throughout the entire area circled in blue.
After this, Jesus is approached by a man named Jairus, who was a ruler of a synagogue in Capernaum, whose daughter was dying. Jesus goes with him to see her, but she dies while they are on the way. When he arrives, he performs an amazing miracle.
Taking her by the hand, he said to her, Talitha cumi, which means, Little girl, I say to you, arise. And immediately the girl got up and began walking, for she was 12 years of age, and they were immediately overcome with amazement. And when Jesus came to the ruler's house and saw the flute players and the crowd making a commotion, but when the crowd had been put outside, he went in and took her by the hand, and the girl arose. And report of this went through all that district.
Jairus, having been such a prominent member of society, means that his family would have been well known and affluent in the community. Matthew, including the fact that there was a crowd there mourning Jairus' daughter, and that the report of the incident spread throughout the region, demonstrates that there was a large body of witnesses to this reported miracle, and an even bigger number of people who were supposed to have heard about it from the witnesses. After this, Jesus was also reported to have healed 2 blind men, who went and spread the report of the healing all throughout the same district. All 4 Gospels go on to record the feeding of the 5,000, which took place in the presence of a Jewish audience in Bethsaida. Then, Matthew and Mark record the feeding of the 4,000 in the presence of a Gentile audience in the Gerasenes in the Decapolis. The ancient practice of only including the number of men present for a given event means that there was likely between 25 and 35,000 people total who witnessed what they believed to be Jesus miraculously creating food. Jesus then heals a deaf man in the region of the Decapolis, who went and told everyone he could about what happened. Later on, Jesus goes to Gennesaret.
When they had crossed over, they came to land at Gennesaret, and moored to the shore. And when they got out of the boat, the people immediately recognized him and ran about the whole region and began to bring the sick people on their beds to wherever they heard he was. And wherever he came, in villages, cities, or countryside, they laid the sick in the marketplaces and implored him that they might touch even the fringe of his garment, and as many as touched it were made well.
It's really quite incredible that Jesus was believed to have enough power that just touching the fringe of his garment could instantaneously heal a person from a crippling disease. After this, Matthew goes on to record Jesus as having returned to Galilee, continuing his healing ministry.
Jesus went on from there and walked beside the Sea of Galilee, and he went up on the mountain and sat down there. And great crowds came to him, bringing with them the lame, the blind, the crippled, the mute, and many others. And they put them at his feet, and he healed them. so that the crowd wondered when they saw the mute speaking, the crippled healthy, the lame walking, and the blind seeing, and they glorified the God of Israel.
Again, Jesus is credited with healing mass numbers of people from all different kinds of disabling illnesses, all throughout the region of Galilee. In closing, if the miracles recorded in the Gospels are true, there would have been many thousands of people healed from disabling illnesses, and hundreds of thousands of witnesses to the healings, many of whom would likely have still been alive when the Gospel authors composed their works. The authors of the Gospels and the first generation of believers clearly believed that Jesus actually did the things attributed to him in the Gospels. If one is to attempt to explain how the first followers of Jesus came to believe that they witnessed Jesus perform so many miracles, there are really only two basic possibilities. 1. Jesus did not perform any miracles, but somehow managed to trick people into believing that he did. This makes no sense because it would be essentially impossible to trick people into believing that they witnessed numerous healings from crippling diseases, blindness, or other kinds of deformities. It would be like going to your 30-year high school reunion and trying to convince your former classmates that there were multiple assemblies wherein numerous healings of seriously disabled children took place in the presence of the whole student body. No one in their right mind of any level of intelligence would believe you, and any person investigating the matter would easily know that you were making it up, especially if there were top-level scholars investigating the claims. 2. Jesus actually did perform at least some miracles. This perfectly explains why so many people believed Jesus performed miracles. Option number 2 drastically outperforms option number 1 in explanatory power and scope. It is less ad hoc because it does not require one to make any non-evidenced assumptions, and it is based on a large body of eyewitness testimony. Option number 2 is only implausible if one assumes that God does not exist, which is circular reasoning. That being the case, we are perfectly reasonable in concluding on historical grounds that Jesus performed numerous miracles, and making the theological inference that the God he claimed to represent actually exists and has revealed himself. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.